We've been reading the Manual for Teachers of A Course in Miracles, and right now we are on question 9, or section 9, and this section has the question, are changes required in the life situation of God's teachers? This is a very short section, and maybe we'll go through it line by line, we'll see. Changes are required in the minds of God's teachers. This may or may not involve changes in the external situation. Remember that no one is where he is by accident, and chance plays no part in God's plan. It is most unlikely that changes in attitudes would not be the first step in the newly made teacher of God's training. There is, however, no set pattern, since training is always highly individualized. There are those who are called upon to change their life situation almost immediately, but these are generally special cases. By far, the majority are given a slowly evolving training program in which as many previous mistakes as possible are corrected. Relationships in particular must be properly perceived and all dark cornerstones of unforgiveness removed. Otherwise, the old thought system still has a basis for return. As the teacher of God advances in his training, he learns one lesson with increasing thoroughness. He does not make his own decisions. He asks his teacher for his answer, and it is this he follows as his guide for action. This becomes easier and easier as the teacher of God learns to give up his own judgment. The giving up of judgment, the obvious prerequisite for hearing God's voice, is usually a fairly slow process, not because it is difficult, but because it is apt to be perceived as personally insulting. The world's training is directed toward achieving a goal in direct opposition to that of our curriculum. The world trains for reliance on one's judgment as the criterion for maturity and strength. Our curriculum trains for the relinquishment of judgment as the necessary condition of salvation. Okay, so the question here is, are changes required in the life situation of God's teachers? And the answer is, it depends. Really, though, one of the main things that I think we can take from A Course in Miracles in general is that it's a path that you can do anywhere at any time, because it's all, about changing your mind. It's not about changing your situation so much. Although, what Jesus is saying is that sometimes a change in situation will be appropriate or will be warranted. For example, that you move somewhere else, or you change your living situation, change the relationship that you're in. But the beauty of A Course in Miracles is that you don't really need to change anything for it to work. All you need to do is change your mind. And changes are required in the minds of God's teachers. This may or may not involve changes in the external situation. Okay. Remember that no one is where he is by accident. So that means, and chance plays no part in God's plan, which means that, let's say you're in a relationship and you get into A Course in Miracles and you get seriously on, or some spiritual path, and you start to wonder, maybe I should not be with this person anymore that I'm with. Now, it could be that that is called for. Maybe it would be better for you, and to make that choice. But on the other hand, this is, remember in the Gospels, Jesus says, what God has brought together, let no man put asunder. In a sense, I think Jesus is referring to that in the Course in saying what he's saying, which is that it might be that you are in that relationship for a very good reason, and there is no accident that you're in that relationship, right? And maybe that is your training ground, that relationship of how to see the other through the eyes of love and forgiveness versus judgment and attack. And a lot of times we kind of run from those kinds of situations, and we try to avoid the people that bring that stuff up for us. But really, this is all about facing it. So there's no accidents, right? There are no accidents. It is most unlikely that changes in attitudes would not be the first step in the newly made teacher of God's training. So changing your attitudes. There is, however, no set pattern since training is always highly individualized. There are those who are called upon to change their life situation almost immediately, but these are generally special cases. So, again, that will tend to be a special case to change your situation. By far, the majority are given a slowly evolving training program in which as many previous mistakes as possible are corrected. Relationships in particular must be properly perceived and all dark cornerstones of unforgiveness removed. Otherwise, the old thought system still has a basis for return. I believe what Jesus is saying here, if you kind of read between the lines a little bit, which is that he's saying that if you're in a relationship and you get on the spiritual path or you get into the course, does not necessarily mean that you need to leave that relationship if it's not working out, or if the other person is not seeing eye to eye, or is not practicing the course, or is not whatever. But rather, it might be that you need to shift your attitude and your perceptions of that person, because that person really is, is whole and perfect. You just can't see them that way, and maybe they can't see. You can help them to see themselves that way by being with them. You can assist them to see that they are whole and perfect as you are. And you may not even feel that way about yourself, otherwise you would not be attacking them. So, it's a training ground. As a teacher of God advances in his training, he learns one lesson with increasing thoroughness. He does not make his own decisions. He asks his teacher for his answer, and is this he follows as his guide for action. Now, what does it mean to ask your teacher? I think that's an important question. And I think that the form that takes is, it could be, I know there are course students who actually, they will ask, right? They will, and someone asked me, what did I think about that? I think that's great. Who am I to judge what someone does? I think there's different ways, different forms in which you can ask your teacher or have a sense of what the right decision is. And I think it can be as easy as tuning into what you truly want and what feels right to you. I mean, right in the sense of what is in alignment with what the court, what is coming from love as opposed to fear. That may also be a way of tuning in to your inner teacher. This becomes easier and easier as the teacher of God learns to give up his own judgment. The giving up of judgment, the obvious prerequisite for hearing God's voice, is usually a fairly slow process, not because it is difficult, but because it is apt to be perceived as personally insulting. So, now, obviously, Helen did hear the Holy Spirit or God's voice, right? Helen was in touch with that. Now, does it mean that we're not a good enough course student if we do not also hear that voice as Helen did? And I think it's an important question to ask. And I think the answer is, again, these things can take different forms, right? Just because Helen heard a voice or was receiving this inner dictation does not necessarily mean that that has to be that way for everyone. Some people do, some people do not. It could be that as you go further along, you will get more in touch with this actual inner voice that will be talking to you and guiding you. I don't know. I'm sure there are more people than not. I don't want to say that, actually. I'm sure there are enough people that are experiencing that, whether they're course students or not, that they receive some kind of inner guidance, that they're in touch with some kind of teacher, internal teacher that is guiding them. Other people just feel like myself, feel guided and have a sense that there's guidance happening, although it may not always be so tangible, but there's an awareness that there is some kind of guidance that is happening. And the reason why we might not do this, we might not give up our own judgment, is because we find that insulting, right? Like, I've worked all my life to be discerning and to be work on my powers of reasoning and judgment, and now this is telling me that I have to give that up. That's insulting. I ain't listening to no inner voice or inner teacher. Now, but what if you understood that is your true self? That's not anything different than you. I think that's part of it. Is that's where I have a problem. I had a problem with external teachers, is following a teacher and thinking, well, how do they know me better than I know myself, right? Why should I follow what they say instead of going by my own inner guidance? And someone would say, well, because your inner guidance sucks. Your inner guidance is the ego. You're following your ego, and a true teacher can show you how to find your way through the maze of your ego. Now this is going a little further and saying there is no external teacher, there's only your internal teacher, which is really your true self. Ramana Maharshi once said, God, Guru, and self are all one, right? So the true Guru is God, and your inner self, your higher self. So you, it doesn't need to be insulting if you understand that it is yourself, right? The inner guide that you are deferring to is really your true self. The world trains for reliance on one's judgment as the criterion for maturity and strength. Our curriculum trains for the relinquishment of judgment as the necessary condition of salvation. And I think that's really the answer to this question, right? Are changes required in the life situation of God's teachers? No. What is really required, sometimes they are, right? That's the answer. But not for the majority. For the majority, what is really required for everyone that does this work is changing your mind. And what is changing your mind? Changing your mind means letting go of your own personal judgment, your own egoic, following the ego, and being open to releasing all judgment and letting love lead the way, right? And that's really it right there. We do not need to necessarily change our situation in any way. We need to change our mind about, there's that great line, which is, seek not to change the world, but seek rather to change your mind about the world. So you don't necessarily need to change anything. You don't need to change your clothes, change your job, change your relationship, change where you're living, or anything, or even your habit patterns, which you might think you do. But it's rather that you see everything that you do through the eyes of love and forgiveness, as opposed to judgment. And that would be the answer to this question in the bottom line here. Thank you for listening, and we're going to keep going through the manual. All right. See you soon.